З 7 по 10 жовтня у Львові відбудеться 18-й екуменічний соціальний тиждень «Розвиток сталих інституцій в часи війни, цінності, самозарадність та партнерство».
Форум відбувається з ініціативи Інституту екуменічних студій Українського католицького університету у співпраці із фондом Конрада Аденауера в Україні та Євангелічною церквою Німеччини.
Роль інституцій в часі війни, досягнення соціальної згуртованості та прогресу в часи кризи та невизначеності, свідчення стійкості державних, освітніх, релігійних, культурних і громадських інституцій. Ці та інші питання обговорять експерти з України та за кордону.
В рамках міжнародного форуму відбудуться круглі столи, панельні дискусії, семінари, виставки, майстер-класи. Запрошуємо молодь, активних громадян, студентів, освітян, журналістів, представників релігійних та громадських організацій до участі.
Реєстрація та деталі на сайті es.uku.edu.ua. Форум відбудеться у гібридному форматі – наживо та онлайн.
Glory to Jesus Christ. Greetings, everybody. Dear colleagues, dear guests, Honorary Society, can you hear me? Does the microphone work? Wonderful. So every single day of our life, we start with the moment of silence, moment of honor. So I suggest that we don't start this meeting with this ritual. Instead, we have this tradition of having a daily reminder of the context of memory at 9 o'clock sharp in the morning. We've had a prayer already, so we can get straight to our discussion panel. So we are speaking of the Institute of National Memory. So it's not about the National Institute of National Memory, but it's about the institution of memory. It's about whether we need or whether perhaps we don't need, perhaps we can discuss it with those that disagree, the institutions that work on the topic of memory. And of course, the key aspect that we're going to navigate is the memorialization of Russian war against Ukraine. And we are speaking of a very interdisciplinary field. What we're going to discuss is why we remember, why we need to remember, and what kinds of forms there are that we can offer to the memory so that it stays alive, so that we can feel this connection and continuation so that it doesn't become distant and very formal. What has already been done in this domain and what still needs to be done. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you the speakers of today's panel. It would make sense to introduce myself. I'm Christina Rutar. I'm a research fellow of cultural memory, assistant professor at the UCU Department of Cultural Studies. I work with society-oriented projects and courses. I'm a researcher of cultural memory, and I would also like to invite you to listen to my podcast, Memory Studio, so a minute of self-advertisement. So who are we going to have today? Right next to me is our guest and a representative with a double role, wearing two hats, so to say. First of all, there's a person who embodies here our partner institution, Deputy Director of Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Ukraine. But also Jan Philip Wilburn is a person who is responsible for the topic of memory as a representative of one of the German cities, a city in Germany, and he will share his experience about working on the grassroots level on this topic. So thank you so much for being here with us. Next to Dr. Jan Philip, we have Julia Artemisian, a research fellow at the Memorial Museum of Totalitarian Regimes Territory of Terror. It's an institution where I used to work and I still could not utter its name. And She is also a fellow at Ivan Kripkevich Institute of Ukrainian Studies. Thank you, Yulia, for being here. Anton Drobovich, a person who is experienced at working at the Institute of Memory, at the head of the institution, Institute of National Memory. And right now he is developing an institution that would work as a center for human rights at Kyiv School of Economics. And it's an important new institution. Memorialization of war, right. And right now it's the only innovative thing. And it's very important to get to know this experience. And it's also wonderful that we have a representative of Lviv City Council, Mr. Yevhen Voyko, administrative manager of the Lviv City Council Executive Committee, and he will share the experience of the executive branch of power. This is who we often refer to as the government. We also have Daria Hirna here online with us. She's a journalist. She's the author of multiple documentary films. She is the head of the Center for Liberation Movement Studies. She will be with us online. Is she here? Wonderful. Hello. Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Daria, for being here. Thank you for finding time to introduce your achievements. So the way we are going to structure our work, we have an hour and a half more or less. We want to share our experience, but also we're ready to hold a dialogue, to introduce you to pose your questions, to share your comments, to also be a part of this conversation. So the first part is going to be quite traditional. Every one of you works in this field and is ready to share the practices. I would like to hand over to Daria Hirna to share her project, her achievements about her research through researching military cemeteries, memorial complexes, how come this project came to pass, what it's meant for, and how this project is meant to shape a kind of aesthetics and ethics about how we think of military cemeteries in Ukraine. So the floor goes to you, and we are ready to listen. Hello, everyone. I hope that my presentation is visible on the screen. Can you see it? Yes, we can see it and we can hear you well. Great. I'm a journalist. I'm an author of a YouTube channel, Faces of Independence. Over past 2 years, I've been looking at memorial cemeteries, military cemeteries in Ukraine and abroad when possible. So my today's participation, I want to be not so much theoretical, but rather practical, because I think that in order to shape new traditions, new visual language of memory, we need to have a certain level of having experienced eye, pay attention to our historical memory that has been erased. That's why I put my topic as military landmarks in Ukraine, brief history and eradication of tradition. It's a very vast topic. There's very little nuanced research on this. Otherwise, we would have been able to open an album, pictures, and try to tap into that for practices. But what I'm going to share today, it's quite generalized. And I won't be able to cover everything, but I will try to outline main problems of our historic experience and also our achievements. So the main breaking point in aesthetics, I will mostly focus on the aesthetic side of things that also contained and contains a lot of Ukrainian symbols. You can see what our tradition used to look like prior to the Soviet occupation and what it's like today, and how we are, in a way, blindly are trying to memorialize or honor people, honor the war heroes led by our own concepts. So how we have gotten here, right? We have such a dramatic discrepancy. I will try to lead you there, explaining it through my own observations. I would like to focus on a couple of key themes here. So prior to the Soviet Union, we've had many examples. The brightest one is Lychakiv Cemetery or Damnya Village Cemetery. It's a very European kind of practice when cemetery was a live open air sculpture museum. It would share the information about how religious the family was, what kind of statues it had. It contained a lot of art. If you speak of a departure point in terms of our material legacy, first military graveyard dates back to 13th century in Volhynia region. It's a tomb of Klim Christinich, an officer under Danilo Halitsky, the king. It's a 3-meter tall cross that is still preserved. We have a huge legacy of Cossack cemeteries. Roman Malenkov is doing his it has a lot of achievements. He located over 800 cemeteries. Many have been erased by Russian occupiers at different points of history. They are still not preserved by history. But we have this problem of military memorial tradition, and it has a lot of different dimensions. So you need to take a comprehensive look at it through the historical retrospection. But this layer of folk art, Cossack art, as manifested in military graveyards, it's very rich. It's hardly studied. We only have a research by Valery Malina, stone crosses and tombstones in Ukraine. So these tombstones are all very different. These crosses are all very different. All shapes are different, but the main symbol is so-called Maltese cross, which is very often, perhaps most often, used in Cossack cemeteries, and it's a symbol of the armed forces of Ukraine today. Since today we speak a lot about Ukrainians being a political nation, we also have, it's very interesting for us to look at the experience of other nations. In Ukrainian Jewish cemeteries, we have up to 1,500 of them. 40 are in good condition owing to Jewish communities. Very often it's not a part of state systemic policy, but these old Jewish cemeteries are very rich in terms of arts and various styles being represented, and quite often you can recognize Baroque elements, Cossack Baroque elements there. I would also like to draw your attention to memorial culture of Ukrainian Halician army. The First World War was the first war when the memorialization of heroes was given a systematic approach. So it was a very important stage for shaping military culture, military memory culture, and we were not on the sidelines of this because the front line moved all over Ukraine and impacted Ukrainian society. So we had an entire society that would honor Ukrainian army. Mostly the landmarks that have been preserved date back to the Ukrainian-Polish War of 1918-1919. You can see the variety of forms, and mostly these are in the Western regions. Most important military cemeteries of the 20th century. This is Makivka Mountain that it memorializes the war, the battle against the forces of the Russian Empire. And this is at the territory of Yaniv Cemetery in Lviv. Also a memorial to the heroes of Ukrainian Halician army. You can also see the aesthetics of lights and the use of Cossack crosses shapes. We also have an interesting experience of the memorialization in Czech Republic. We know that Czechoslovakia was one of the main platforms for the intelligentsia from the Ukrainian National Republic that was defeated, and therefore we owe a lot to the Czechs. We have a couple of landmarks of Brinsky and Kasyan that really deserve your attention from the viewpoint of their use of Ukrainian symbols. I will not speak in detail on this because this is an entirely different and comprehensive topic. We also have Mikhailo Parashchuk's landmarks on the territory of Germany in two small towns. This is a memorial to prisoners of war from the World War I. What's quite significant is that the shapes memorialization are much closer to the European tradition of the European nations. And to summarize, this interruption in history that we have had, lengthy occupations and ruining of our memory, if you try to look for overlapping points in our military memorialization culture, the main the significant feature is the light stone and also Cossack cross or Simon Petlura's cross. Quite often you can see it in the flags of the Ukrainian military, and even Roman Ratushny also in his will wanted to be buried under such a cross. And this cross is also most significant in the cemetery in Khmelnytsk region. This is a brotherly tomb of UNR heroes, Ukrainian National Republic heroes. And unfortunately, on the other side of Zbruch, on the territory of Ukrainian National Republic, there are hardly any military landmarks. Everything was eradicated and cleansed during the Soviet era. And military memorials of Ukrainian rebel army, they were erected not systematically in the 90s. They were not a part of systemic state policy, but we have quite interesting examples, especially in the Lviv region. Especially have here the memorials in Ustya, Rozvadiv, and Nedilne villages on the mountain of Dil. And quite often, in terms of memorialization of UPA, Ukrainian rebel army, we see sacred symbols. As you can see, quite often it's an Saint Michael and International Military Cemetery and necropolis. There's many next to us military cemeteries to other people that have been through our land, Polish, Belgian, Austrian, and others, Czech, and others. So a lot of examples of the military aesthetics that you can tap into that are not systematized.
you will find a lot of symbolism and aesthetics. And this is a very interesting example for all of us because we have Muslims fighting in the Ukrainian army, and these are very interesting cases for us. Also, we can follow suit in some cases, thinking about memorialization of the fallen ones in this war. Also, these are some Polish memorialization cases. If you have an opportunity, Orliata Cemetery in Lviv, this is a canonical military necropolis which was erected in this neoclassicist style according to all the rules of military necropolistics. Probably I will not go into the specifics here, but this is a very light necropolis with nice fencing. When I talk to tour guides of the Lechaki Cemetery, they say that visitors really want to see this part of the cemetery as it is considered to be a very good one. Daria, we will kindly ask you probably to wrap up. Yes, I know that you're online and maybe it's not easy to follow timing. Yes, I will try to be laconic. So everything was destroyed by the Soviet Union, all of these beautiful aesthetic things. So we have very gloomy aesthetics, dark ones. Probably I will not dwell on that. It's not very systematized, as a matter of fact, for the proletariat. That was one of the ways of having a lot of similarity for generals. We can see that these were very fancy, expensive, solid monuments. I think that oftentimes in Ukraine, in memory of our servicemen, we also tried to recreate something that was impacted by the 90s. And sometimes, uh, if we speak about young defenders who were killed in action, we can see memorialization, which is done in that way, which does not really represent what it has to. This is our memorialization, and what I find very upsetting, and that is exactly why we need to think about systemic changes. This is memorialization of the military, because you can see how they memorialize actually Russian soldiers. So this is the visual language of memorials of these cemeteries, and then it means that we are sharing the same cultural space with Russia if we do the same thing as they do. That is why I think that we are all aware of the essence of the problem. If to speak about the positive changes which are taking place, then this is the Pantheon in the city of Ternopil, from a very light stone as of 2023. Then we also have different architectural competitions in Lviv, Mykolaiv, Vilnius, where they select different projects. And we can see that we have this tradition back, the tradition of using light colors rather than dark ones. This is the memorial to the defenders in Kyiv, which also stands out as compared to other cases. I think that, yes, it's time for me to conclude. And I would like to say in conclusion that we really need to have systematic changes, to have more examples like that, because we have very few cases which have something different. It's important for us to have the competitions of architects held, and also to have public opinion meetings for us to have different results, and also to explore this topic. Because what you see right now, what I have prepared, these are my empirical studies, the studies that I conducted. I'm at the Ukrainian Catholic University right now, trying to gather at an academic level and other levels the experience of the First World War, because in Ukraine we do not have very many sources that we can tap into to pay tribute to our defenders. Thank you for your attention and your patience. Over to you. Thank you, Daria, for such an important contextual introduction to this panel discussion. And of course, we will be looking forward to the results of your study because Daria is studying at the humanitarian faculty of the Ukrainian Catholic University, working on her master's degree. That is why it's really important to have more and more students opting for this topic, for them to be more vocal. We already heard about Lviv as an example. That is why I think it's important for us to give the floor to Yevhen, who can tell us more about challenges and about achievements that we have as related to the introduction of the policy of memory and memorialization in Lviv. Maybe you can share about what you've managed to achieve and what is in the pipeline. Yes, thank you for inviting me to participate in such an important discussion. And this is such a relevant topic for all of us amidst war. And we know that people are very sensitive as far as this topic is concerned. That is why I think it's important for us to start this meeting with one of the videos. The Voice of America made this video, and it was the 14th month of the war. And this is a very short video clip. I think it has some 3 minutes max. Yes. And let's dim the lights if possible. Thank you. We cannot do that? Okay, that's fine.
Ми маємо обов'язок зробити принаймні те, що в наших руках, для того, щоб
It is our
його родина
duty to do what we can in this case to make sure that the family of the defender can feel that they were a special person.
Звичайно, домовини стоять одна поряд іншої. Дві родини стоять також обернені обличчям один до одного. І я пригадую в
Or
одному
as you
моменті,
can see that we have actually coffins next to each other, and we see the families, and they're facing each other, and I remember this moment when there were two mothers and they looked at each other, they met each other between these coffins, and they embraced each other.
Імені президента України, Верховного Головнокомандувача Збройних сил України, прошу прийняти цей прапор як символ держави, яку він любив та захищав. Наші співчуття.
Often when we have foreign guests, they ask us if that is a common practice in Ukraine. No, this is not a common practice. This is the way we do it in Lviv. So in this video, you could see how Lviv commemorates the last tourney of the defender, but there was an evolution prior to that. There were some preconditions for establishment of this practice. We've started paying more attention to the very rite and tradition since 2014. So probably I would like to elucidate this topic, and then I will also share a short presentation because I am respectful of time given to me, and I will tell you more about the practices that we use in the city of Lviv. I will share more information. You know that we have people coming from different cities coming to Lviv, and they're interested in our approach. And of course, it was possible for us to do that because Lviv um, is quite not a very big city, and actually the distances are very close. However, when we started in 2014, and we started with the initiative of the mayor of the city of Lviv. In 2014, when the Russian-Ukrainian war broke out, we didn't have well-balanced policies related to this subject matter. They were the first funeral services, and we realized that there was no one who was responsible for that. You know that if to speak about different military structures, it was different. It was about drafting that they started actually. Support of families, for instance, was not part of the agenda at all. They didn't know that that was part of the jobs. And together was, I had a very good, I received this role from the city mayor, and being very sensitive to these issues, I was the person to inform families about their sons who died in this war. That was, I still remember how it felt to me. And of course, we started receiving questions from the families of defenders. That is why the first thing that we would have to say was that, please, we will really help you with everything. You shouldn't be concerned about all practicalities. We will help you. We had the first funeral of that was the funeral of General Kulchitsky, who died in Donetchina. Then Zelenopilya, when very many people died. That was we had 3 defenders where we had this funeral at the same time, and I think that there was one of them who was only 18, and that was a very complex and challenging thing. So together with our garrison church, of course, we had chaplains, but still these cases were quite rare. Then the Academy of Land Forces in Lviv, and we decided to develop the algorithm of official ceremony of this funeral rite. I think that, yes, we have managed to modify it, but once again, going back to the structural part, to organize the funeral of a defender, there were almost 100 people who are involved, and it's about only one funeral service. So you have 100 people working, and we had 2, 3, even 15 funerals. That means that And, for the outsiders, probably they're not aware of the complexity of the organization of these funerals when everyone has to operate as a single organism. That is, of course, not something to be proud of, but I still want to speak about this today. We have many guests, we have international delegations, those who participate in these funeral services, and they ask us if this is the practice which is applied nationwide. But I think it's important for us to start a dialogue, to have these practices everywhere. We have different places, different when families learned that somebody who's really close to their heart was killed in action, but it has to be a different approach, not just people learning about the demise and that the body is in the morgue. I think that it has to be a different thing. We need to share stories about these people because every morning the municipality staff, they prepare information about our defenders, their bios and their pictures. You can see them in front of the city council. And we know that the very funeral is the culmination. However, what is key is the meeting that you have as the family. So we have people from the city council who meet the family. They take into consideration their preferences, their wishes, because what is really important is what they want to see. One of the first questions that we pose when we discuss all these logistical issues with the family members, we just say that you just need to be there, and it's our job to do everything else. Everything that relates to this religious ritual part, everything related to the logistical part, information sharing, once again, transportation, that kind of issue. This is part of what we do. This is our job. After funerals, very often we receive questions from family members. They say that we saw a photographer or there was a cameraman, and it is also something that we decided to organize. Yes, all of them receive a USB drive with some pictures and videos. After funerals, I often communicate with these families. And I remember the first time I met them and what happens after the funeral. It's important that family members during the funeral, after the funeral, understand that the citizens of Lviv are saying goodbye to the heroes. These are the people who laid down their lives for us. This is about the very ceremony. And another important point, because we started with the melody that you could hear in the video, we have a trumpeter, and that is something that a lot of people pay attention to. And actually, that was the 100th day of war when we initiated this tradition. That was such a sad reason behind that. I feel embarrassed discussing it. And it was because of the ignorance of the citizens of Lviv. Do you know why? We had some cases when every day we have a funeral, and that some people they just get used to that. And this is what we started doing, just got used to the war. But there was a funeral, and there were people passing the market square. Sometimes people continued talking to each other, enjoying their coffee. The ceremony as a symbol, because once again, I think it was in 2006 when we started the ceremony, when we have the trumpeter from the city council performing this melody, and now it's a different thing. We have a trumpeter paying tribute to those who died in this war. And for those who were present at the ceremony, you know that for 2 minutes there is complete silence at the market square. And in these 2 minutes, of course, I think that you become more aware that sometimes what we do is wrong. And these things, they really bring us back to commemoration. And yes, absolutely, that this is what we are doing right now. But it's not only owing to us, it is also about church. They're always supporting the families of our defenders. And we know that it's not only the Academy of Land Forces, but other military structures and departments that we have in the regions, they actually participate in this process because, of course, the Academy cannot cover the need that we have. But it is working, and we stand ready to share this practice with other cities. As far as other important issues are concerned, I will try to be really brief. Daria has already touched upon some of them. So I will just share our experience related to the memorial. Could you please share the presentation?
So, if we're speaking about the memorial complex for the military heroes of Ukraine, this is the place you're well familiar with. This is the Mars Field, so-called Mars Field, next to the Lechakiv Cemetery. This is where we expect to construct a memorial to our heroes that are buried there. This is a unique case. And for me, it's a very interesting experience. Daria was also a member of this process, partially. She is well aware of what kind of emotions we've been through. But it's the case when the shape of a dialogue provides the fruit. Why? Because in our city, we have had a practice of doing architectural calls for large projects. For instance, we have a memorial to the Celestial 100 in Krevonosa Street. And in this case, we opted for the same route. We created terms of reference. It took us a while to compile terms of reference. We had an entire task force under the auspices of First Deputy of the city mayor. We also have experts involved, families of the heroes, a very lively discussion. So we created terms of reference. Then we opened a call, architectural call, and then we got the results. And a company of young architects from Khmelnytsky won. And what is visualized in the right corner on top, it's a basic picture. So this is their concept that they presented. So the results were at hand, and we thought that it's time to go to the next stage, but we wouldn't have been leave unless a discussion was to be had. And our chief architect had an assignment, and we all had an assignment with every family to personally discuss what is intended to be constructed there. So in the course of a year, we have had over 40 meetings in our session hall. And with every single family, we have discussed absolutely everything, ranging from a single bench that could be installed or shouldn't be installed next to the tombstone and a cross, and ranging to information center, museum, and other things that are provided for in the future concept of the memorial. So this discussion lasted for over a year, and it was a very difficult one. I think you might have been observing what was happening, but we found a solution. And in a year, the designers suggested a new updated version that has also been introduced to the community, introduced to the families, and we are already on the designing stage, and we will start construction works in spring as soon as the weather allows. So I'm referring to the fact that this is a thorny route, a very difficult one, but it is possible through communication. This is yet another example of a military memorial, which is going to be constructed in place of a different military cemetery. We did not have an architectural call here. Instead, we used key elements of the memorial, which is going to be erected in Mechnikova Street, and the Institute of Spatial Development developed this concept that you can see right now. So this is to both save time and money. We opted for a simpler path, but basically it replicates in terms of its content the main elements of the Mechnikov Street memorial. So the city has an idea to make sure that all the burial sites within our community, because we also have other heroes buried in communities that are part of our bigger community. So up to 15, 16 local cemeteries where our heroes have been laid to rest. And our task and our goal that has been agreed on with the families is that the graves of heroes fallen in the Russian war against Ukraine all followed one style, visualized in one style. Families accepted that, and we are going to implement that in the near future. If you could please go to the next slide. What concerns other elements of honoring the heroes? There was a request on the part of families to make sure that we also install memory plaques. Daria shared a lot of examples in her presentation about different kinds of crosses or tombstones. And we have some examples where memorial plaques are located on top of the buildings, and quite often they are bringing a lot of sadness. Unfortunately, it quite often does not perform the function that is initially intended when we install the plaque. So our Department of Architecture elaborated a single standard, which we are going to use from now on when honoring our heroes and installing memorial plaques. We have installed over 600 by now. If you could please switch to the next slide. Recently, we have had a forum of self-governance bodies, and we had a discussion there. I talked together. I discussed it with the city of Vinnytsia, because Vinnytsia was also one of the cities that introduced this tradition on the city level, while I said that Lviv became the first city where there are no there's no need to promote the minute of silence anymore. There are no reminders that need to take place anymore. Quite often, other towns call us, especially from the field of civil activism, people from the field of civil activism. They say we're not allowed to. Well, but there was an order on behalf of the president of Ukraine. Well, I'm just sharing what we're encountering daily. But I'd like to say that it's all so easy to accomplish. There's nothing easier than this. Every city, every community has access to their notification systems, so it's very easy to accomplish. I'm not even going to expand on that. So in Lviv, we have this minute of silence. We've had it for a while, over a year or so. It's there. I'm grateful to the Lviv residents and the community that they have responded well to this. But I would like to quickly explain why we did not have this tradition right away. So we have memorial service every day at 11 o'clock and then 12 o'clock next to the city hall. So it's organically played the role of this minute of silence or minute of honor, because people knew that this is when the funeral takes place. But of course, people get used to everything. And since there was also the state level initiative put forward by the president of Ukraine, and of course, we're not separate from our country, I think it's the right thing to do. This is the initiative that organically became part of Lviv, and now I cannot imagine the city without it. So this is the way it looks now. One more important element of the presence in the life of our heroes is honoring with one of the biggest awards of our city. This is the St. George's Memorial Award. It's given to the families from the hands of the top military management of our region and city mayor. We have these ceremonies at least twice a month, quite often. Such ceremonies are dedicated to some important milestones in the calendar. So it's a special event that takes place in the city council and where both families and military top management are present. We also work in the domain of supporting various civil initiatives, civil society initiatives. So the families of the fallen heroes that took the initiative of this fair, now we don't have enough space to make the fair even bigger. And so this is a platform for military businesses. What concerns city programs, I will not cover all of them, but mainly I will focus on Lviv executive structures of the Lviv City Council. Within every structure, we have a channel redirected to help veterans and families that are the survivors of the war. So in terms of the families that lost a family member at war, such families receive target assistance of 50,000 hryvnias every year until the children become of age. And there are other societies where the hero was present. So a lot of streets where street names were dedicated to the names of our heroes. It's also reflected in naming various public sites. For instance, one of such cases is having a city fountain opposite to King Danilo's monument, dedicated to Dmytro Kutsubailo from Da Vinci Wolves. Also having squares named in honor of military heroes, and a separate procedure, a separate project implemented by the city is creating the memory sites dedicated to various branches of the military. For instance, this is a memorial that is intended to be constructed in Strejska Street, dedicated to the National Guard. Thank you very much for your attention. It's a complex topic, but very important for the city. I'm a terrible moderator because I don't interrupt people, and I allowed you to share everything you wanted to share. I understand why it takes a while to share. It's a complex topic. You have something to share. It's a wonderful indicator of the fact that here are the people that are working and creating this policy of memory. We will not have a second round of questions, though, from myself, because we will take questions from the audience when we're done. I have some questions that I would like to ask, but I will ask them later behind the scenes. So we spoke about the emotional register of memory. We spoke about bidding farewell, about the emotional ritual of bidding farewell. Leave here sets an example of how it could be implemented. And there's one more documentary project of a UCU graduate, a film called Flowers in the Mars Field. It's about cities and institutions that make sure that this bidding farewell is a dignified procedure. So the first two people that spoke mentioned the fact that memory and memorialization and our heroes, those that come back as fallen heroes, that it's an important challenge how to honor them, every man and woman, in a dignified way, and also remembering about various experiences, also civilian experiences as well. So now I would like to hand over to Julia so that she can share about her experience in working in the museum, the territory of terror, about how we can put such experience in museums or fill museums with this experience, when it's time to start such museums, and also the participants of the forum will actually have an opportunity to visit the museum on Friday. I'm just very sorry, but you need to let go of me. I'm sure we have some questions to ask you, but we understand that as a state official, you have things to do. Yes, I'm grateful to you, grateful to all the participants for sharing this topic and for even raising this topic. Thank you. It's an honor for me to outline the projects of our museum, and I'm a combination of a theoretician and practitioner. I work at this research institution. So here's the first slide. So our museum would like to invite you. So briefly about the museum, what is key here is representing the experience of various ethnic groups, especially the residents of Lviv in the times of extreme violence during the war period. And our exhibition is based on the historiographic approach, and the main accent is the oral historic methodology. So we talk about this violence because the Memorial Museum embodies the place that is right under there. There used to be a ghetto there and then a prison number 25. So we speak of this experience of the Holocaust, about the behavior of the local residents, mass deportation. So our topics are quite fast, but very delicate in the museum.
You have already, you can see part of the exhibition. These are some of the exhibits. The next slide, please. And if to speak about memorialization and about some of the developments that we have had recently, I think that maybe we have not managed to cover fully this topic. And we can see it in this discussion that it is something that we put on the table and we are discussing. But we can go back to 2014. In 2014, we started working on the memorialization and commemoration methodologies. And I think it's important for us to have viable tools and practices to have a commemoration. That is why, preparing for this presentation and for this panel session, I was trying to see what we have related to the topic of this panel. I drew a conclusion that approaches to memorialization have been changing and transforming, but what remained open was how we speak about the war which is taking place right now. This is an open question for us. By 2022, in the center of not only our museum, but generally in public space, when we had the revolution of dignity, all those changes in society, civil society, which was very active, and now we can see how people are trying to how people were trying to protect the country, to defend, and we had an anti-terrorist operation in that period of Ukrainian history. You can see similar exhibitions. You can see flags from Maidan. You can see a helmet. These were the exhibits, and of course we cannot cover all of these issues just like that, but there are many things related to the revolution of dignity. This is the story that we share about this event. Then we established context with Crimea SOS, Euromaidan SOS initiatives. We had documentaries dedicated to these events. Another topic would be IDPs, the loss of your home. We had an exhibition, and this is an exhibit from this exhibition. When in this project, people share the stories of their lives. Also, those people who stayed in frontline territories to show how difficult their life is on the one hand. On the other hand, to create a platform for discussion of the subject matter. And the museum was a very important space for IDPs where they could discuss this issue. 2019. What was important in this year was that we focus on representing different experiences. And there was an invisible battalion. There was also a part about participation of women. Yes, then what happened after Maidan? Yes, about this tradition that I have mentioned before of voluntary participation. Then we had another exhibition between prairies when we had Staropilsk, Popasna. And that is why we really try to, in this exhibition between the prairies, to understand how this memory could be represented, what were the weaks and strengths. It was important for us not just to learn this documentation experience and what to do about it, but also we had some outcomes. In the Luhansk Museum, there was a project, and in the middle of the slide, you can see the example of how this exhibition should look like, taking into consideration your commemorative practices. But then the full on invasion started, and we faced new challenges. 2022, the first months of the full scale invasion, we could see many people leaving their homes, fleeing their homes. There was a lot of movement, and our museum played a very important role in this process to host these people. We had more platforms for discussions. I think that it was not only about collection, it was about us trying to revisit and rethink all of these important points. In December of 2022, the Museum of Ukrainian Victory, this is another project which was exhibited in the museum. We had the process of the war, we had more exhibits appearing. The first conclusion, so to say, of this first phase of collection. In May and August, we had an exhibition of open funds together with the museum from Luhansk. And you can see they continue collecting different exhibits. We have over 100. Some of them are war trophies, letters written by children, and also what shows the presence. we have technical documentation, we have the map of Kherson and Mykolaiv, we have newspapers published in Izum, in occupation. But then the problem is with what material museums can work, what they can accept, what is not really something they can exhibit. Because on the one hand, there is also some spatial limitation that we have, and at the same time, you cannot collect everything. The third one, let's not forget about ethical dilemmas. Because sometimes people go to newly liberated areas. Very often we receive these exhibits and these items from our servicemen. And of course, there is a selection process. We cannot take everything. If that is something that is very strange to us, we cannot really take this item. Then the next slide that I would like to focus on. Another important experience of our museum, we continue collecting exhibits. So we are a very important platform for creation of something new as well. An example of this would be a Wounded Culture project implemented in 2024. It is very important for us to have cultural legacy and heritage collected thanks to VR technologies as well. It was supported by Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Ukraine. I would like to tell you more about this project. We had expeditions to Odessa, Ochtyrka, and Trostianets, aiming at documentation of museums affected at war. We also talked to those people who work in museums. We started with Ochtyrka. In March, the museum was damaged, and it was not only about us conducting interviews and documenting the answers of people, how people took care of their archives, but we also had 3D models, which is exhibited in the Museum of Victory, the Museum of Ukrainian Victory. That is the correct name. You can see the model of this museum, how it looked like, what was possible to preserve. It's really important in terms of documentation. So we had 22 episodes under this project. Not all of them are available and accessible due to safety measures and ethical reasoning. Why? Because you know that this is a normal practice actually when some people, after giving the interview, ask not to make it public. And we understand that this is an absolutely normal practice if it is about testimonies and if it is about such a sensitive issue. What I failed to mention, the exhibitions that we had across Ukraine during Maidan, about Maidan events, about the anti-terrorist operation. I know that there were some cases when they were a very good source of information for our enemies. That is why it is about protection of personal data. We know from our colleagues that sometimes some strange people come to you and come to these museums and look carefully at all the exhibits, probably trying to have some gains from this information for their own benefit. There is also another important event which took place in 2023, dedicated to memorialization of those who died in Olenivka. We also had some testimonies. There were also children symbolizing the souls of those who died, and we have mothers, Azov community. They had the names and initials of those who died. And then we also had another format of the same project. There is also another project, Zone of Seismic Activity. It is about an everyday life of women, about experience of women. When we opened this exhibition, we had an extremely important discussion. Have these changes take place? We focus not only on the war, but also on all those changes brought by the war. Here we have our heroes who documented their experience, women heroes. And there's another exhibition that we have. This is an exhibition of posters. These are Ukrainian artists who try to use this means of art. And they discuss through these posters what is happening, the reality, what is topical. And this year, we also had another initiative, Requiem in memory of. You can see some kids' pictures. These are the works, the pictures, drawings of children of our servicemen. And during this memorial requiem, we also lit memorial candles. We also had some other practices such as liturgy. Of course, it's not easy for us to say that we have a well planned process and it is complete. I think that we are still in the process of achieving this. Another conclusion of mine would be that we are probably digressing now from collection. It's more about reconsideration and rethinking of all of the experience that we have. This is the women's perspective, female voices, drawings of children. We understand that that is a different perspective as well. That's a different level of memorialization. Now, focusing on us, the museum, which is an institution open to dialogue, and we are a platform for discussions. We are open for different discussions. And as I already mentioned, we continue collecting different exhibits. And I think that this is what museums do. They are collecting everything related to the war. They are working on collections. And of course, we cannot accept all of the items to our museum. That is why I think that there are some limitations also because we have inquiries from different people as well as the defenders. Sometimes we receive very absurd items brought to us, and that's why we cannot really work with all of these items and materials. We also have a surah, which is a chapter of the Quran, which was translated into Cyrillic. Yes, I think that it's been a really fantastic presentation of your activities, and this is a very good example of how museum can become a very good space for dialogues, trying to integrate different approaches, exhibitions. You also function as a platform for discussions, and you also highlighted on the importance of what is there to be collected, what are the priority voices for us, what is of the biggest significance for us, because we know that there are many things which are still being silenced, and some of them are more visible. We focus on different categories of population, the civilians, the military, perpetrators, those who are accountable for the crimes they commit. We also have two more panelists, but we do not really have so much time left. And I understand that maybe this is not very fair to ask the remaining panelists to be very laconic because other panelists took more time. I don't really know how to handle this situation. I hope that you are in no hurry and we can dedicate more time for this discussion, this panel session. So I would like to address Jan Philip now. And we know that you could be an observer in terms of our setting and our environment. You can analyze it from outside, all our attempts to memorialize what is happening right now, because we are not in this position of post-war yet. We are still living in midst of war. We have a lot of need and to have cemeteries. Unfortunately, we cannot say that everything is over. We have local regional museums and they keep collecting all those items. And yes, it's obvious that we have spatial limitations as well. At the same time, we really want to learn more about international experience. We always keep saying that we are in a unique situation. However, we really want to learn from others. And also, we know that in Germany, you also have your own practices, and we can also learn a lot from these processes, and we can borrow some of the practices, also the involvement of different institutions in the context of the responsibility of civil society. When we have, yeah, so maybe you will pick to what point from these questions you would like to respond. Thank you.
Okay, I have one. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so first of all, thank you for these interesting presentations. It summed up some of the things I've already seen in Ukraine. So basically, what the question is, what can I contribute to this panel discussion? I can, I think, contribute a little by my German perspective, as you already said. And I would like to say a few words on three questions. So the first question is always, if you enter into this process of memorialization, where you are right at the beginning at the moment. But these processes, they take years, decades in the end. And in Germany, we still are dealing with the Second World War. We are still dealing with the memorialization of the communist dictatorship. Yeah? So this is a very long process. And I think there are three questions we have to think about when thinking about memorialization. The first is, who do we memorialize? So the first group, we heard quite a lot. These are the heroes. And we had these examples of these cemeteries. So those fallen soldiers, and I'm quite sure this will be the most prominent group, so to speak, where Ukrainians will focus their will focus on. But I think there are also some other groups which will become more, wouldn't say more important, but you will pay attention to in the future. These are the second group, I would say, the victims of the war, so non-soldiers. But imagine those people, civilians who died in Russian missile strikes, or those IDPs who had to leave the country. And I think there are two other groups which you will see, which will play a role in that. And the third group is, let's say, the ordinary people. Because imagine your children asking you in 10, 20 years, no, Daddy, what did you do during the war? And imagine you had not been a soldier in that time. So we are sitting here, we would be honestly part of these, let's say, ordinary people. So that is also something which will be part of this process. And finally, you will have the group of the perpetrators. So those, basically Russian soldiers or whoever it was, who are responsible for this war. And that will be, I think, a very hard, very tough discussion if you maybe also think about future relations between Ukraine and Russia, however they might look like somewhere in the future. So what we have touched upon right now is only one group. It is, of course, at the moment, the most important one. But from my German perspective, I would like to just point out there will be further groups on which this process will focus on. The second question is basically, how do you memorialize these things? And we have heard quite already a lot of them. So you have basically state actors, for example, the museum, or the Lviv City Council, who try to organize all these processes. And really, it's really interesting and heartwarming to see what they are already doing. But I think it's also important to look at the civil actors. So look at the families. How will they preserve the memory of their beloved ones? And civil society, what can civil society contribute to that? You know? So just one question, will you have the pictures of the fallen soldiers within your communities? And I very much like to see this brass placards, because I very like this approach, because a big memorial site, it's easier to evade that than a placard you see every day. If you walk along that every day and you see, okay, this was a soldier who died in the war, for example, yeah, that's much more in your everyday life, and children start asking questions when they see that, as compared to big memorial site, which has it is good. I don't want to criticize that, but I just want to say these are the two actors, civil society and the state actors, and you also have the question of, is it part of the public space or the private space? So, and this is a huge field where everything happens. But I would say civil society approach, and this approach to get these heroes or victims into everyday life of your nation. This is very, very important, I would say. Just one example, which I very much like in Germany, maybe you know about that. There is a private initiative of someone who's doing these brass stones called Stolpersteine. I think you have it in Kiev. There is some initiative for that.
Камені спотикання в Рівному і в Києві.
So, and what I very much like about this approach is that you have it in your everyday life. Yeah? Just one example, when I lived in Potsdam, I had a few of these stones on the way from my home where I lived to the next station. And I had to walk by every day. And I saw that, and that much more stuck in my mind than going to maybe a memorial site. And I think that's, yeah, if you can say that, I think that is really memory which you have every day in your mind and which is part of your life. And the third question, I think, which will be very debated, is the question, why? Why do you memorize? First answer is very clear. You think of your beloved ones, of course. These are your fathers, your brothers, your children, whoever. And of course, you think about those people you lost, that's for sure. But it is also a question of, what kind of role models are they to us? Because if you're confronted with that, you always have to ask yourself, how would I react in such a situation? You know? So it is the question of remembrance in some way shapes citizens. You know? If you talk about them and see what they sacrifice in the end, also their life, this is a universal question. Yeah? What is your personal relationship to the community around you? You know? And so this is a very important question, I would say, a very important answer to that question. Why do you memorialize that? And the third, well, maybe answer is, I've already heard the term that this is your war of independence. And I think that is the very core of everything. Of course, Ukraine is independent since 1991, for sure. But now you're defending your independence, in a war. And that is very much part of your identity as Ukrainians. And I'm absolutely sure this will play a crucial role for Ukraine's future memorialization process. So, very shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you so much for such wonderful systematic approach. When we think of memory, we need to keep these three aspects in mind. I agree. And I would like to gradually transition to Anton. And I think he will be able to share his thoughts that visited him when listening to us, to the presentations, pondering on his experience. And I also have a question, whether we can make people remember by force or intentionally. For instance, whether we stop for a minute of silence or not, yes, we can inform, but we cannot make remember. So how do we work together to make sure that this culture of memory is cultivated organically and as a society and individually as well, but also as a society, as a community, we understand that it's not only our obligation or duty, but also it's our organic impetus to remember. So this is also in reference to what Jan Philipp underscored, and even we already have a law which shapes it as the War on Independence. I would like to start with this additional question and then transition to the general question. So answering your question, whether we can make somebody remember through force, yes, you could. We know of such cases, but do we want to be the country of that kind? Well, that's a different question. Unfortunately, we are well familiar with the cases of making people remember through force, but it does not end well. And answering the question asked by Jan Philipp, why do we remember or how do we remember? It impacts the last question, why you remember. Because if it's under duress, you are made remember in a certain way. But nothing is explained to you. So it turns into a formal artificial ritual, and then it has a negative impact on why it's non-democratic, it's non-dignified. So yes, it's possible, but we have opted for a different route. We are a democratic country, and when standing for liberal views, I think that memory under duress is dangerous because it leads you to the opposite result. You want patriotic citizens, but what you get instead are either slaves deprived of their own opinion or people that hate the official memory and loathe the official concept. So I think it's not worth going there at all. So now, as to the main question asked at this panel, and also the three questions that you initially voiced at the very beginning. So, institution of memory and memorization of war. Traditionally, and here we immediately get into this post-totalitarian trap. All of us, most of us, come back from or inherited totalitarian practices of construing an identity, because the Soviet Union construed a Soviet human being. Soviet Union was built by force through eradication. What was eradicated? National memory. So that Kazakhs, Buryats, Belarus nation, Ukrainian nation became Soviets. You had to first erase whatever was consisted in the identity of these people. So erase many national memories. So there's a certain tension, there's certain connection between identity and remembrance. So what we intentionally highlight, what is important for us as to the community, this answers the question of who we are. We opt what to remember and what to forget. This is an important detail in order to understand who we are. There are no identities as a collection of narratives, because collection of narratives is the collection of remembered stories. Look at any identity. Christian identity of any denomination is built upon certain stories that this confession preserves and hands down through generations. The same is true about other identities, political identities. The same is true. So us as a community that grew out of partially, thank God, but partially out of totalitarian tradition, and somehow managed to preserve what's ours there, what used to be there in place. Even though there was an empire before that also tried to tarnish identity, but God helped us to survive both the empire and the totalitarian regime. And in this totalitarian system, a keeper and monopolist on the memory. Family history is something else, but the monopolist is the state. So we get the state as an independent state in 1991 through a lot of fighting. And what is interesting, in Article 15, there's a important mechanism, protective mechanism, no obligatory ideologies. This is in Article 15 of the Constitution, because collective memory, official memory, is directly has to do with ideology. So this is prohibited in the Constitution. So for political actors through dozens of years, the questions of memory and identity are not a priority. So a lot of presidents, prime ministers, they pull on their vyshyvankas, saying that culture is important, but they cut cultural budgets every year. So culture was never a priority other than a couple of specific cases. So we see that this protective mechanism has led to the fact that the state did not take care of the issues of identity and memory. Other than one case, Yushchenko, the president, who did a lot to contribute to recover the memory of Holodomor, the intentional famine. Otherwise, the only state actor that took care of our collective memory was Russia. They did their best. When they only pulled themselves together, in the 90s, they worked on the collective memory of Germany, Poland, Ukraine. They invested hundreds of millions of dollars into that. So that was a very well-oiled, far-fetching system. The only name itself, Russische Museum in Berlin, the only well-known cultural name, and the same was true for us. Russians worked systemically. They created special trips and field trips that just took the youngsters to the sites of the Napoleon's battle. So for a very long time, the state did not perform its function or failed to perform the function of the keeper of the memory. So under such conditions, other actors have had to grow. The church, the university. It was the university that created the right of preserving the memory of the World War II. The church was the best to remember the repressions of the totalitarian regime, especially the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. Greek Catholic and the Protestant churches, I guess, suffered most from the totalitarian regime. So they really preserved this memory well. So in a certain way, it became clear that there's no state monopoly on collective memory. There's a request to have synergy there, but there was no management, and there's still no management. Institute of National Memory, created by Yushchenko as a tool to preserve the memory of Holodomor, performed its official function to preserve the Holodomor memory, and its mandate was also extended to totalitarian regimes, decolonization, and in 2023, a new draft was prepared on Russian imperial legacy and a law on the foundations of national memory, which has now been updated in the parliament. So the state right now is trying to somehow pull itself together, especially during the large-scale invasion, and to take upon itself this function of the keeper. But since we have a civil society and we also have this protective mechanism, it cannot be the single one. We need to have a good system of checks and balances and partnership with the church, civil society, and business. As Daria Hirna mentioned, calls and competitions, especially for memorial sites, it's a purely business approach because it's about competition over projects to be implemented. So yes, it comes down to business. And now coming down to my last idea. Being a civil servant for 5 years, I was entitled to work on preservation of national memory. And I'm also knowing the experience of German Foundation that works in Germany and all across Europe and recovers the memory of the Second World War and forced laborers all across Europe. So I could say that we created a funeral ritual in 2022. Yevhen mentioned that mostly people were not familiar with this ritual, even though we created it, we piloted it, and we put it in. 2020 also was a law or a concept on memorial cemetery was created. Even though in 2021, 2021, there were not a lot of actors, state actors, that wanted to support it. And this project was shelved for 2 years until 2022. A unification of Cossack crosses, we raised it to the state level. There were a couple of enthusiasts in Lviv that have been working on this for dozens of years. There was Malinkov that was mentioned, but there was no discussion on the state level. The Institute of State Memory issued a recommendation about sectors of memorial graveyards, and the Cossack cross was not featured in there as the main shape. 10 principles of memorialization of war that we have created, my colleague Anton Lahusha and myself. These are the attempts at institutionalization of the memory of war. But I have an entire list of what we have accomplished as a state institution, but it will never work on its own because our task right now is to have synchrony of the state, civil society, business, universities, and find this golden format of interaction. Then we can have a healthy collective memory and healthy civil identity. If we can strike that in the times of war, that would be great. That would be great success. If we don't, the risks are high. Conservative agenda growing, polarization, and so on. So this might lead us to what first speakers mentioned. Something's not working, memory has been erased, and so on. So I don't know if I answered your question, but to make sure that memory is alive, it needs to be logical and can't be forced, and it will bear fruit. Thank you very much. I think we're only approaching this context, and we would be ready to carry this dialogue on, but I need to give room for at least one question. So if there's a line or something, so I think there was a hand raised and a lot of questions were addressed at us. We stay here. We will not let go of Johan. We also have opportunities for informal conversation. So right now we are going to take one question from the room.
Yes. Yes, but it has to be a very brief or laconic question or comment. This is not a question, this is a comment to all our panelists because you have really inspired me with sharing your ideas and representing the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. We mostly focus on the experience of Lviv, but we also have the experience of Kyiv. Kyiv is also trying to deal with memorialization, the memory of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and there are two special places which remind us about the reality of the war. One of them is the memory wall at Zoltovarchy Church, where we have the photographs of the celestial hundreds from the times of the Maidan, and we also have the flags dedicated to the defenders. And of course, no one is even trying to do anything about that. And we have these photographs at the memorial wall. They are placed not in a very coordinated manner, but we know that it's also very important for us to have all of these photographs. They date back to 2014. From the context and from the godly perspective, I think that the deaths of civilians in military is the same because, yes, you know that at the state level, we say that the civilians, they die by accident, basically. But you know that we cannot be indifferent to any death, being it a civilian person or a military person. That is why I can only agree with Jan that there will be another category, the civilian category, and we really need to think about commemoration. We have Bucha also, which is a very important site. You know that there were so many civilians who died there. Moshchun is another site, and the Kiev state administration really did their best to have a proper commemoration site where we had this fight, and thanks to the defenders, our capital was not captured and seized. There were many houses destroyed, forests burned, and this is another commemorative site. When the memorial wall was opened, the organizers said a very important thing that Daria has also referenced to. If to speak about the heritage of the Soviet Union. And you know that they had memorials to the soldiers whose names were not known. Yes, unknown soldier monument. However, it is so important for us to know all the names of all those who died in this brutal Russian-Ukrainian war, both civilians and militaries. The name is really important. It's important in theology. It's about our human nature and our identity. The war really ruins the lives of people, and there were so many life stories behind these names. That is why, to continue what Anton has brought up, church has a proposal related to memorialization because it is about eternal memory. This is what we hear in our prayers. This is when we pray for all those who have fallen during this war. Thank you. Thank you for this extremely important comment and for this emphasis that you have placed. And of course, during this panel session, we cannot cover everything like the challenges and the solutions, many other aspects. We just heard from colleagues what they try to do. I think it's important for us to see the diversity of actors who work in this realm, in this domain, to consider the multitude of approaches. For us to have the dialogue, it's important to have meetings more frequently, to have opportunities created for these conversations to take place. Thank you so much for these extremely important aspects that you have highlighted and outlined. It's important, yes, to remember the names. And when we have this recommendation, to have a moment of silence, it's a good idea to think about somebody, specific, even if you do not know anybody who died in war. There are many initiatives. There is the platform of memory memorial. They share the stories of people, military and civilian. And another short question. Yes, we had the hand raised here. My name is Brother Mikhailo. I am from Ivano-Frankivsk Seminary. I'm in the 5th year of my studies, Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church. And I also have a question about the places at cemeteries, which is also a problem. And it relates to the servicemen, the civilians. Traditionally, we have this formal ceremony, we have a coffin, we we have different monuments. This is part of the tradition. But in Ukraine, we also have 3 crematoriums. So is it possible also to organize this and to save space? Because it doesn't take up so much space and it looks really nice in Europe. Because you have a uniform approach, and of course, if you really want, to discern the military and the civilians, yes, you can do that. But we can have some distinction. You can use different commemorative plaques. Yes, Anton raised his hand. Yes, it's important for us to have different memorial sites, secular, military. I would like to underline that the majority of military cemeteries, and we have over 500 of sectors of military graveyards, these are not really military cemeteries as such. These are like parts of the cemeteries. They are part of general cemeteries or some old cemeteries. The only military cemetery in times of independence already which was built, that is the National Memorial Cemetery near Kyiv. This is the only new cemetery. In other cases, these are only parts of regular cemeteries. But there, we also had some German graveyards. There were bilateral agreements, but these were like military sites of burial. And this is a very important detail because one of very important tasks is actually to have new military cemeteries because Yevhen actually has already left. I think that regionally speaking, what they do is one of the best practices, but this is just a sector that they have. The Mars field, as we call it, this is not a military cemetery, this is a sector. And actually, they have very little space left to commemorate everyone there. That is why all those who participated in defense of Ukraine and with the help of God, we will win. Yes, and they will live their long lives, but they have the right to be buried there as well. And these are thousands of people in all the communities that also require space. This is such a major issue. What about the spaces and the size for these cemeteries? And then again, we didn't even have the term of a military cemetery. We just lobbied this term to appear in our regulatory framework. To respond to your question, cremation, we have, I guess, the fourth or the fifth line. There is the plan actually to have a new crematorium built that is going to be a big building and it is in the center of the capital. And again, these that will be not enough for us. We need to have a network. This is a new practice, a new culture of erection of military columbariums at this cemetery that we have discussed in Lviv. That is going to be a totally different military culture. It's important for us to promote it and to lobby it. It's due to many reasons it's more convenient. And I know that there are certain religious caveats. Yes, and this is a theological discussion about resurrection and second coming, but the state covers all expenses for the burial. Then I think that we do not really very many people go for the traditional ceremony and burial because this is what the state is taking care of. If you take a look at the National Memorial Cemetery or the project of the Lviv necropolis, you will see these designer decisions, how well thought over they are. And of course, it could really be so popular that communities will scale up this experience and they will use this practice of having columbariums. Then, well, people would just use Cossack crosses, the traditional ones. We have two sides and we have some urns actually. And only the first columbarium burial site. Thank you. Okay, so this is some of the signals that we are catching, and I see that participants are leaving us and also the panels, and it's not because they are not interested, but it's only because we've run out of time. Thank you, dear speakers, dear panelists, for your participation, for working in this area, for all your contributions. Thank you, everyone, for having uh, been listening having been listening to us. And we can also continue this discussion after this panel session. We do not have all the answers to all the questions. This is part of the process. We are creating the new culture of memory currently. And of course, it's important that we have this topic raised at the international event, the 18th Ecumenical Social Week. It's important for us to create new memories. Thank